Just picture this for a moment. A handful of cracked clay tablets from thousands of years back suddenly beginning to reveal things that could shake the very foundations of human history. That is precisely the claim gaining attention right now. Apparently, artificial intelligence has managed to piece together and decode portions of ancient Sumerian tablets that nobody had been able to fully interpret for over 100 years. These are the very same mysterious tablets uncovered among the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia. A great many of them were shattered, a great many were incomplete, and some had even spent years gathering dust in the back rooms of museums. But in 2025, newly developed AI-based translation models began stitching thousands of scattered fragments together. What came out of this process left many people genuinely surprised. Some are convinced these are nothing but old myths, while others argue these writings carry references to the birth of humanity, divine beings, strange technology, and secrets that may never have been intended for the world to know. But the most pressing question remains this. What exactly did AI uncover that has dragged one of history's most contested debates back into the spotlight? Before diving deeper into that, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thousands of years ago, when the majority of the world had not even developed a proper system for writing, the Sumerians living across Mesopotamia were already pressing information into clay tablets. As centuries passed, enormous numbers of these tablets became buried beneath layers of earth and stayed hidden from the world for a very long time. Archaeologists would eventually pull these remarkable tablets from the ruins of the ancient cities of Eridu and Nippur. In the beginning, people assumed they held nothing more than old religious narratives or royal records. But little by little, it became apparent that the full story was likely far more significant than anyone had imagined. The difficulty was that these tablets had been written in cuneiform, one of the most ancient writing systems ever known to exist. Reading it was an enormously complex task. A single symbol could carry entirely different meanings depending on where it appeared. Countless words had no straightforward equivalent in any modern language. And making matters worse, a huge portion of the tablets were physically broken. In certain cases, half of a single line was gone, while in others, whole sections had simply been destroyed. Many of these records sat inside museum storage rooms for years on end. Some were assigned the wrong labels, and others were simply not considered significant enough to warrant serious examination. Entire scholarly careers were devoted to trying to make sense of these writings, yet the greatest obstacle was always the same. Researchers could only ever examine small, isolated pieces. Nobody ever had access to the full picture. Then, in 2025, everything began to shift. New AI translation models arrived that had been trained extensively on thousands of Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian texts. AI was not merely converting words from one language to another. It was identifying recurring patterns, filling in missing symbols with educated predictions, and drawing connections between records from entirely separate civilizations. Where human scholars could only see disconnected fragments, AI started uncovering hidden links running between them. When AI set about joining thousands of scattered pieces of Sumerian tablets together, what surfaced genuinely caught many people off guard. For centuries, the widely held belief was that humanity had been created only once. Whether in ancient narratives or religious traditions, the origin of humans had nearly always been described as a single, definitive moment. But these tablets appear to tell a rather different story. During the AI analysis, several texts were identified that applied different terminology when referring to humans. At a quick glance, this might not seem particularly unusual, but once these terms were placed alongside other records for comparison, a strange and recurring pattern started to take shape. It appeared as though not all humans were being regarded in the same manner. Certain groups were characterized differently, and the roles assigned to them were different as well. In multiple locations, phrases turned up that translated roughly to something along the lines of working life. Elsewhere, there were references to low-light clay. Another puzzling phrase was read as those who do not multiply. Initially, scholars were inclined to treat these expressions as poetic or figurative language. But once AI flagged them appearing again and again across many different tablets, the situation began to look considerably more unusual. Some researchers now believe these descriptions may point to early human groups that were brought into existence for very specific purposes. If that reading holds up, it would imply that some of the earliest humans were fashioned purely to carry out labor. They were never meant to build lasting populations, but were used in a manner more resembling a temporary workforce. What makes it even more striking is that certain texts mention groups that later vanished entirely. It almost reads as though some versions proved unsuccessful. They were replaced, done away with, or superseded by newer versions. Human creation is presented here not as a single moment, but as something that played out across multiple distinct phases. If this interpretation of the tablets is accurate, the whole picture transforms entirely. Humans did not simply appear out of nowhere, but arrived at their present form only after numerous attempts and revisions. And this is precisely where the most significant question arises. If different kinds of humans were being created, what was driving that need? Which then leads directly to another question. Why were these varied human types brought into existence to begin with? As AI pressed on, connecting more and more fragments of the Sumerian tablets, a fresh and genuinely fascinating pattern began to surface. It appeared that these ancient texts did not treat humans as one unified group at all. Rather, they described humanity as falling into separate and distinct categories. This would explain why so many tablets draw on different names and terms when referring to humans. Among all of these, two terms attract the greatest interest, or Lulu and Sagiga. For a long time, scholars had assumed these were simply general words meaning human beings. But when AI began comparing the context in which each term appeared across different tablets, some notable distinctions started to emerge. The term Lulu appears in numerous places in reference to ordinary humans, while Sagiga had been translated some years ago by certain scholars as black-haired people. When this first emerged, it did not draw much notice. But once AI examined hundreds of records together, the term kept showing up alongside particular roles. Certain texts describe individuals who were diligent, compliant, and carried out their duties without raising questions. Some researchers have linked these descriptions to the concept of obedient laborers. The most striking details appear in lines referring to people whose eyes carried no doubt. Many regard this as purely symbolic language, while others believe it could be describing an entirely compliant group, people who simply performed their given work and never challenged the order around them. The tablets also reference distinct roles assigned to different groups. Some groups are associated with physical labor and construction, others with religious functions, and still others with administrative tasks. Beyond that, a handful of texts even seem to suggest differences in physical characteristics and appearance. This is the reason certain researchers attempt to read them as early classifications of humanity. These interpretations, however, remain a matter of ongoing debate, and no firm conclusion has yet been established. But one thing stands out clearly. These tablets do not portray humans as a single uniform group. Rather, they outline different roles, different identities, and different kinds of people existing alongside one another. Eden. Was this the first human factory zone? As AI continued linking more fragments of the Sumerian tablets together, references to a location called Eden or Eden kept surfacing again and again. Many people hearing that name will immediately picture the biblical Garden of Eden, yet these ancient records describe it in a notably different way. It is not presented here as simply a beautiful garden, but rather as a kind of designated working zone. According to the tablets, this region sat between two rivers, which is why certain researchers have connected it to the fertile lowlands of Mesopotamia. But the most compelling detail is that several texts describe this place as an area where new human groups were prepared and then put to the test. Some records explain that once a group was formed, it was given a trial to complete. If it succeeded in its assigned function, it received a name and was dispatched to fulfill a specific role. But not every attempt went as planned. A number of texts mention groups that failed to meet what was expected of them. This is where some puzzling details begin to surface. Certain writings describe people who were sent into the rivers or carried off by them. Other passages mention groups directed toward the mountains, after which they vanish entirely from the record. Nobody today truly understands what these descriptions are pointing to. They may simply be figurative language. Yet when AI brought different tablets together, these same events appeared repeatedly across the records. Because of this, a number of researchers have begun discussing what is called the human prototype theory. According to this idea, the texts may be pointing toward different versions of humanity or early experimental attempts. Some succeeded, some did not, and some may have been erased from history entirely. Although no solid evidence supports this reading, going through these records does leave the impression that Eden was far more than just a place of habitation. It seems to have been the center of a much larger purpose, where new groups were formed, tested, and then sent off in different directions. When Enki upgraded humans, the story of the supposed experiments conducted in Eden does not stop there. According to certain interpretations of the Sumerian tablets, the earliest human groups were dealing with a serious problem. They were capable of working, but they had no ability to grow their own numbers. Every new group had to be produced from scratch, over and over again. When a group's population dropped too low, it simply had to be recreated. The whole arrangement was growing slow and increasingly difficult to keep running. Some texts contain hints suggesting that these early humans may have had restrictions placed on their ability to reproduce. Put another way, they were unable to generate new individuals like themselves. Certain researchers interpret this as a built-in control mechanism. In their view, if the entire system was designed to remain under supervision, then the ability to multiply would also need to stay in the hands of whoever was in charge. Over time, though, this arrangement appears to have grown less sustainable. The tablets do not spell out the reasons clearly, but several passages suggest that the earlier models were no longer sufficient. There was an increasing demand for beings that were more capable, sharper in mind, and better able to endure. This is the point in the story where the name Enki starts appearing. Within Sumerian tradition, Enki is recognized as the deity of wisdom and knowledge. According to certain readings of the texts, Enki chose to alter the design of humans. Modern audiences often draw comparisons to genetic modification, even though that phrase appears nowhere in the ancient tablets. Yet the texts do describe changes that appear to expand human capacities. These newer humans are portrayed as considerably more intelligent than those who came before. They were not simply laborers who carried out instructions. They could learn, adjust to new circumstances, and sustain their own lives. Most significantly, they now possessed the capacity to reproduce. This meant they no longer needed to be manufactured again and again. They could expand their numbers entirely on their own. If this reading of the records holds up, it represents the single greatest turning point in the entire human story. For the first time, humans were becoming something beyond just a workforce. They were developing into a growing, evolving species. That moment shifted the direction of everything that followed. And out of that shift came a figure known as Adapa, the first upgraded human. Following the modifications attributed to Enki, Sumerian stories begin describing a human unlike any of the rest. His name was Adapa. Across many ancient texts, Adapa is not portrayed as an ordinary person, but as something distinctly and deliberately different. Some writings describe him as the finest among all humans, while others portray him as someone blessed with extraordinary wisdom. Adapa, it is said, was not created simply to follow orders or carry out labor. He had the capacity to think clearly, to understand deeply, and to make his own decisions. He could speak, reason, and even guide others around him. This is precisely why so many people regard him as the first upgraded human. According to Sumerian tradition, Enki granted him a level of wisdom that ordinary humans simply did not have. But here is where something interesting comes into the picture. Adapa was given knowledge, yet not complete freedom alongside it. Put another way, he could comprehend a great many things, but certain boundaries were still placed upon him. That is exactly why his story so clearly reflects a tension between understanding and freedom. Then a single day arrived that would alter his destiny forever. According to the ancient accounts, Adapa was called before Anu, the god of the heavens. This was a remarkable occasion because being summoned into the court of the gods was considered an immense honor for any human being. When Adapa appeared before them, food and drink connected to immortality were set in front of him. Had he accepted them, it is said, he could have gained everlasting life. But prior to the journey, Enki had warned him clearly that regardless of what was offered, he must neither eat nor drink anything while there. Adapa followed his creator's instructions without question. Even with immortality placed right before him, he turned it away. He did precisely what he had been told, and that one decision reshaped both his own fate and the fate of all humanity. The chance for eternal life passed him by, and death became a permanent condition of human existence. After the tale of Adapa, another major turning point surfaces within the Sumerian tablets. This shift was not only about humans, but also about the gods themselves, who these stories describe as the original creators of humanity. Many records, connected through the work of researchers and AI analysis, suggest that not all of the gods shared the same vision when it came to humanity's future. Two names in particular keep appearing over and over again: Enki and Enlil. According to these stories, Enki recognized genuine potential in human beings. He believed that if humans were offered knowledge, they could learn, evolve, and build something meaningful in their world. He did not wish for them to remain simply workers or servants forever. Perhaps that is why he is so often described as a true supporter of humanity. Enlil, on the other hand, held an entirely different perspective. For him, what mattered most above everything else was order. He believed humans should receive only the amount of knowledge required to carry out their assigned work. If they were allowed too much freedom or too much understanding, they could become difficult to manage and control. For that reason, he consistently favored keeping firm limits in place. This is the point where the conflict between freedom and obedience truly begins to take shape. On one side stood Enki, hoping to see humans grow and advance, while on the other side, Enlil sought to keep them firmly within defined boundaries. As time passed, this disagreement grew into a broader debate about the entire future of humanity. Several tablets suggest that certain groups were taught the practice of agriculture. They learned how to plant seeds and cultivate crops from the earth. Some individuals were taught the art of writing so that knowledge and records could be preserved across generations. Other groups learned how to work with metals, fashion tools, and develop the practice of metallurgy. Yet this knowledge was not distributed equally among everyone. Some people received far more information, while others were limited strictly to the tasks they had been assigned. This is why many researchers draw a connection between these stories and the concept of controlled development. It almost feels as though human advancement was being permitted to progress only up to a carefully managed point. If these interpretations hold any truth, then the earliest chapter of human history was not simply a story of growth and progress. It was also a story of conflict between knowledge, power, and the desire for control. And as that struggle deepened, a decision emerged that would change absolutely everything: the Great Cataclysm. Was there truly an attempt to erase humanity entirely? As the human population kept growing and people continued accumulating knowledge, the tension among the gods began to rise as well. According to Sumerian stories, Enlil in particular was deeply displeased with the direction things were heading. Numerous ancient texts describe him as the fierce guardian of order and control. In his eyes, humans had been brought into existence for a very specific purpose, and yet now everything was shifting. Humans were no longer simply laboring. They were learning, developing, and becoming far more independent than had ever been intended. The stories tell us that the human population began growing at a rapid pace. Cities started forming, farming spread across the land, and human society became more organized than it had ever been before. While certain gods saw this as a sign of positive progress, Enlil viewed it as a serious problem. He believed, it is said, that humans were pushing well beyond the limits originally set for them. This is where the story of the Great Flood enters the picture. Many Sumerian tablets describe an enormous flood that was intended to wipe the world clean. Some researchers interpret it as a humanity reset, a deliberate effort to start everything over from scratch. According to the stories, Enlil made the decision that humans should be entirely removed and that a new order should begin in their place. But the story does not conclude there. On the opposing side, Enki had not abandoned humanity. When he learned of the coming catastrophe, it is said that he secretly passed a warning to one particular human. In the Sumerian records, this individual is known as Zusudra. In later Akkadian accounts, that same figure is referred to as Utnapishtim. Many people believe this narrative eventually became the foundation for the biblical story of Noah. According to the accounts, Enki instructed him to construct a large boat. He warned him that a devastating flood was on its way, one powerful enough to destroy everything in existence. For that reason, he needed to protect his family, a number of other people, and all the essential things needed to keep life going. Then, that day finally came. Rain fell heavily from the sky, rivers burst beyond their banks, and vast stretches of land vanished beneath the rising water. According to the Sumerian writings, the Great Flood was not simply a natural event, but rather a calculated choice made to wipe humanity from existence. Yet because Enki had issued his warning, a number of people managed to survive. Once the flood waters finally pulled back, the world that remained looked nothing like the one before. The old cities were gone, and an entirely new era was ready to unfold. Those who had lived through the disaster became the foundation for all the generations that followed. That is precisely why the human race did not vanish entirely and why its story kept moving forward. The mystery of lost technology. Following the flood narrative, another puzzling matter surfaces within the Sumerian tablets, and it may well be the most disputed element of the whole story. Certain translations assembled by AI include descriptions that feel strikingly unlike ordinary mythology. They reference things that give the impression the authors were writing about sophisticated technology. Some texts speak of vehicles capable of traveling through the air. These craft are described as having wings constructed from both wood and metal. The most remarkable detail is that certain passages indicate they did not rely solely on the wind for movement, but were instead driven by some kind of internal fire or energy source. From a contemporary standpoint, some people attempt to read these descriptions as references to flying machines or advanced devices, though no firm evidence has yet been found to back up that interpretation. In a comparable fashion, certain tablets mention a metal being placed inside what is described as a heat container. The description calls to mind something resembling molten metal. In a handful of places, there are also mentions of heat structures that appear to be linked to the generation of energy. For a long time, scholars treated these passages as nothing more than poetic expression. But when AI brought different records together, the very same pattern kept showing up repeatedly. Some texts additionally describe an intense light that scorched the ground. One passage states that a whole city was leveled within a single day. Another tells of mountains being torn apart and cracked open. Because of this, certain individuals connect these accounts to concepts resembling energy-based weapons. Mainstream scholars, however, continue to regard them as portrayals of natural catastrophes or symbolic storytelling. Yet the most compelling aspect is not the technology on its own, but rather how that knowledge was passed around. Records assembled by AI point to the idea that this knowledge was not distributed evenly across all of humanity. Certain groups received privileged information while others were deliberately excluded from it. Some people were instructed in the working of metals. Some were taught farming and writing, while others were confined purely to manual labor. If these readings are accurate, then knowledge itself functioned as a form of power. Those who held more of it gained greater authority and influence over others. Those who were denied access remained reliant on those above them. This is precisely why many researchers have come to believe that in the ancient world, technology served not only as an instrument of advancement, but also as a means of keeping people in their place. Were distinct human groups deliberately designed to be different from one another? As AI linked and examined various Sumerian tablets together, yet another unexpected pattern started to take shape. Numerous texts did not portray humans as a single, unified group. Rather, it appeared as though different categories of people had been shaped and prepared for specific roles and duties. This is why certain distinctive terms keep appearing over and over, and their true meanings remain a subject of ongoing debate. In some locations, there are references to the clay of strength. These individuals are described as those who carried out heavy labor. Based on several interpretations, they were associated with mining and demanding physical tasks. It is said that such groups were employed to pull resources from the earth and carry out enormous building projects. By contrast, other texts describe those referred to as the blood of radiance. These people are linked to knowledge, ceremonial practice, and religious obligations. They are portrayed as priests, scribes, and observers of celestial movements. It appears as though they were granted considerably more information and far greater privileges than everyone else. There are also mentions of what are called the shadow people. In certain records, these are described as groups charged with tending animals and handling everyday tasks. They were excluded from certain locations and denied access to particular kinds of knowledge. What makes this even more striking is that several texts also attribute distinct physical traits to these various groups. Some passages refer to people marked by the sun. Others describe individuals with lighter skin, while some mention people who inhabited difficult and unforgiving lands. Whether these were genuine physical differences or simply figurative descriptions remains uncertain. AI analysis uncovered yet another notable detail. Some groups were permitted to learn language and writing, while others were not given that opportunity. Certain people were introduced to astronomy so they could track stars and follow the movements of the sky. Meanwhile, other groups were restricted entirely to their designated work. It is clear that knowledge was not shared on equal terms. The most mysterious dimension of Sumerian civilization is not just the accounts of human beginnings or the tales involving the gods. The true mystery may actually rest in the warnings they chose to leave behind for those who would come after them. Many AI-connected translations indicate that the Sumerians were not simply documenting the events of their own era, but were also consistently keeping their eyes on the heavens. In the ancient city of Ur, and later throughout Babylon, priests and sky observers spent centuries cataloging stars, planets, and eclipses. What is truly remarkable is that they had no modern optical instruments whatsoever, and yet they painstakingly noted even the slightest shifts occurring in the sky above. For them, the heavens were not merely a beautiful sight. They functioned almost like a living system of communication. Within these celestial records, one particular name surfaces again and again: Nibiru. According to certain interpretations, Nibiru was a unique and extraordinary celestial body. It is sometimes described as a crossing planet, said to complete an enormous cycle roughly every 3,600 years. Nibiru allegedly returns on a path mainstream scientists refuse to accept. Yet references to it keep showing up across Sumerian stories again and again. What makes things especially fascinating is that certain tablets don't describe Nibiru as just another planet. It carries titles like the Destroyer and the Light Blocker. Researchers have spent many years puzzling over those names. Was this language pointing to a genuine astronomical event, or simply a symbolic kind of warning passed down through generations? Even now, nobody can offer a definitive answer. So what exactly did AI reveal to us? After taking in everything this story has covered, one question towers above the rest. What precisely did AI uncover that set off such intense debate across the world? Did it expose some brand new secret, or did it simply draw connections between things that had been right in front of humanity for thousands of years? Here's the thing. AI didn't invent any of these stories. It didn't carve new tablets or rewrite history from scratch. What it did was take thousands of scattered, broken pieces and begin linking them together. For centuries, scholars examined individual tablets in isolation. One researcher held one fragment while someone else worked on an entirely different one. But once AI started processing all of these records simultaneously, patterns began emerging that had never been so visible before. Stories that once seemed unrelated suddenly looked like pieces belonging to a far larger picture. This is exactly where the argument between myth and historical record takes hold. Certain experts maintain that these are symbolic myths, composed in figurative language, never meant to be read literally. In their view, tales about gods, select groups of humans, and Nibiru are stories, nothing more. But on the other side, there are those who believe these accounts may carry traces of genuine ancient knowledge that slowly transformed into myth across the centuries. When these narratives get placed alongside archaeological evidence and the broader sweep of human history, the questions become harder to brush aside. How did agriculture suddenly appear among humans? How did writing systems emerge so rapidly? Why do flood narratives surface independently across completely separate civilizations? And why do certain pivotal moments in human history remain points of disagreement among scholars even today? Questions like these fuel ongoing discussion around the purposeful creation theory. Those who hold this view suggest that human development may not have unfolded entirely by chance, that some guiding purpose or deliberate plan may have been at work behind the scenes. Others dismiss this line of thinking entirely, calling it imagination dressed up in mythological clothing. What the real truth is, nobody can state with any certainty. In much the same way, the control system theory continues drawing people in. The tablets return repeatedly to themes of knowledge being distributed unevenly, with distinct roles assigned to distinct human groups. Some were granted deeper understanding, while others remained limited in what they were permitted to know. If these stories carry more weight than simple mythology, they appear to be describing a structure where not every person was given the same place or purpose. Now, the choice of interpretation belongs to you. Are these nothing but ancient myths told around fires long extinguished? Or is there something deeper buried within them, some truth we still haven't fully grasped? If these tablets, thousands of years old, genuinely tell a story about humans being shaped for different purposes, then here's the real question. Are we still living inside that ancient design today, or have we finally moved beyond it? So go ahead and share your thoughts. Do you believe these ancient tablets hold a hidden truth, or are they simply myths? Drop your opinion in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this, make sure to like and share it.